visual. Music is something you just listen to, but architecture is an art where you are exposed to visual images. These images could be, of course, arches. They could be sometimes bridges. They could be buildings, etc. But of course, the architect who designed these shapes, either square or circular or triangular, let's say shapes, the architect has always in mind this artistic dimension of his or her work. When you design, for example, a tower, either in New York or in Doha today, you do not only consider the building as such, but you also consider the aesthetic dimension. This is why architecture is also a visual art. Architecture, that's the third dimension, is probably the most sophisticated form of expression that maybe humanity has so far created. It's one of the most ancient forms of artistic expression. Because from the very beginning of human civilization, man was always trying to build different, let's say, edifices. They could be palaces, they could be walls, they could be bridges, they could be pyramids, etc., etc. Therefore, we can say that architecture is probably much more older than theater or photography, of course, or cinema, or the likes. So when we are therefore studying architecture, in general, we are studying a very meaningful language. It's not only some aesthetic science, but it's also a very meaningful language. This meaning is probably shared by other forms of expression. When you go to a museum or to an art gallery, you discover the work of some painters. And of course, these painters, when they create some works, they try to express some thoughts. It could be thoughts about anger, or desire, or fear, or whatever. I'm not here to speak about what artists and painters in particular try to express. But architects also, when designing any shape, they also try to transmit some ideas and some messages from the beginning of human civilization up to now. And so this is why I am trying today to cover this topic with you, because I would like you to see architecture from more professional lens than just something that is there, built for probably maybe economic or military or other reasons. When we build a wall or a gate or a mausoleum or a bridge, whatever, there's always some message that the architect is trying to transmit. So this is something that I wanted to be clear from the beginning. Modernity. We're here trying to study architecture and modernity in Morocco. I am not, of course, today going to talk to you about all architecture in Morocco, though I have to, let's say, cover that briefly, because we cannot learn or probably understand the meaning of this dynamic that is today happening in Morocco in matters of architecture without going back to the roots. So the roots are also meaningful. That's why I will briefly refer to that in the slides I'm going to use. So modernity is something that is always associated with the West. Whenever we think of modernity, we associate it with the West. Europe first, and later on the West. The West could be the United States, but it could also be Canada, this could also be other countries. And so modernity, when it emerged in the 18th century, that's something that's happened in the 18th century, it was the product of so many revolutions. A philosophical revolution, a political revolution, an industrial revolution, a technological revolution, and even an architectural revolution. So modernity in Europe, or in the West, was the expression of this change that happened in Europe. A change from tradition to something new. And this change, as I said, was expressed on so many different levels. So if we take the philosophical level, we can understand that modernity in the West was the product of rationality. Rationality, that is reason. And so Europeans from the 18th century onwards discovered analyzing or explaining the universe from a religious angle, but rather apply more scientific criterion to understand it. So this is the reason why we have some philosophers like Descartes who said, I think, therefore I am. So when he said, I think, therefore I exist, it means that existence for him is no longer a question of biology or a question of physique or a question of religion, but it was first and foremost a question of logic and reasoning. In matters of politics, modernity in Europe was also associated with some political revolutions. In France, it was the very beginning of this revolution called the French Revolution, which happened in 1789. In 1789. So, in 1789, the French Revolution, let's say, challenged all political institutions, like feudalism. So feudalism and the monarchy were abolished by the French Revolution. And instead we will have what we call today the Republic, or the state of law. And so we can therefore say that modernity in matters of politics was also bringing something new. In matters of science, we can also cite a lot of things that happened in this modern era. It's, for example, the beginning of empirical approach to nature. Empirical means something extremely materialistic. That is, to analyze and to understand nature. Biologists like Charles Darwin studied nature and tried to understand how nature works. And one of his findings was that nature works according to a cycle. And this cycle is the survival for the fittest. So, let's say, a creature, be it an animal or an insect or a bird or a fish or even a human being, survives because they have the ability to adapt to their environment. If you don't have this ability, you perish. In matters of architecture, So here I'm just trying to put you in the general context. In matters of architecture, Europe also was gradually changing from the rural society to an urban society. Rural means we abandon the countryside life and the village life where small communities lived there for centuries to big cities, okay? To big cities. And this is the time when some big cities in Europe first, but later on even in the United States, would emerge. So the city of London, for example, the city of Paris, the city of Barcelona, etc., are all examples of this shift that's happened in Europe, or this modern Europe, from this rural and traditional European society to an urban or an urbanized European society. In these cities, a new architecture would emerge. And so this architecture would be like, let's say, a scientific planned structure. Cities will look like, let's say, a kind of grill. Instead of villages that are there just because there is water or just because there is a hill that protects the inhabitants from invaders. No, the new cities that will emerge in this Europe will have more a scientific, because it's modern, a scientific design. And so in most cases it's what we call the grill system, something like this, where streets and avenues are well structured, and where residential areas are well structured. And so you cannot find in a city, for example, like Paris, or more precisely Barcelona, any, let's say, accidental structure. Everything is well designed, as if it's a work of the computer. Barcelona is indeed the best example of modern architecture. And I recommend you, when you go home, just to Google Barcelona, the architecture of Barcelona, and you will see and you will discover how indeed Barcelona looks like this grill system. Everything is well structured, the buildings, the avenues, the streets, etc. So all this, therefore, means that architecture and urban planning in Europe, and of course later on in the United States, because New York in particular, and Chicago and other big American cities, will follow the same model. So all these Western and European cities will adopt a very modern architecture. And this architecture expresses the change that's happened in the society as a whole. The change in matters of economy, in matters of society, in matters of commerce, industry, etc. And when you have all these changes happening, the old architecture that we called earlier a rural architecture can no longer satisfy the needs of the society. And so, the need of building something new or designing something new becomes a necessity. So this is what we can also see today in China. When you see how China has changed from a very rural society, if you go again and do research about China in the 50s and 60s, you will discover that China indeed looked like a very, very backward country in matters of architecture. But today, when you see how China looks like, you realize that China has simply become so modern. The same, again, applies to Gulf countries, like Qatar in particular, and the United Arab Emirates. When you see Dubai or when you see Doha today, you realize that these are extremely modern countries in matters of architecture. I'm not speaking about culture or ethics or whatever, but in matters of architecture, you realize that today the Gulf countries have become extremely modern. And the best example is what is today happening in Doha, in Qatar, where the World Cup is organized. All the visitors are impressed by how sophisticated Qatar looks like today. It's because Qatar, as an example of a Gulf country, is trying to send new messages. And these new messages are about how modern we are. How modern we are. You cannot tell people, particularly the outside world, that we are modern verbally. Even if you try to tell people that we are modern verbally, it does not work. But when you create buildings, when you create bridges, when you create stadiums, like what Doha has, or Qatar has succeeded to do, you really send very significant messages to the rest of the world that we are extremely advanced and we are extremely modern, probably more modern than you. So this is therefore how you should understand this shift from modernity, from tradition to modernity in matters of architecture. I have talked about the West, and I have also talked about modernity. Now I would like to move to Morocco, where we are also today witnessing the beginning of a transition towards a modern architecture, but at large, a modern society to come in maybe the coming years or decades. Before doing that, and I would like here just to say something. Whenever you have a question or a comment or whatever, please interrupt me. Because if you have something in mind and you would like to add or to ask, do it. It's better for you to, let's say, participate in this presentation as well. Now, if we go back to some examples of a very old architecture, we can find plenty in the world. So, if you go to Egypt, as an example, you realize that the Egyptians, the very early Egyptians, called the pharaohs, built pyramids. And pyramids were not only, let's say, symmetries. They were not only symmetries, but they were more than symmetries. So if I ask you today, what could be the meaning of the pyramids? Why have the old Egyptians built such pyramids in such a massive manner? Because indeed, when you go there, you realize that they are extremely massive and huge. And they have resisted, and they are still there, even if centuries and centuries have passed, but they have not. I mean, time and nature have not succeeded to, let's say, shape them. So what could the pyramid signify as far as architecture is concerned?
I think they built these pyramids to express strength and power.
Strength and power? Yes, I agree with that.
They were built, especially that they are high, and then they were not those means to build such things. They were only traditional means. They express how Egyptian culture was great and how they were powerful.
Okay, and power. Power. Yes.
It may represent the ego of the pharaohs.
It's good. Yes. These are big, let's say, rulers and emperors. And of course, they also try to express that in stones. That's also possible. Yes, sir?
Display of wealth.
Sorry?
Display of wealth.
Well, I would say power. Power. Could be financial, but it's more power than wealth. Yes?
There were strong and powerful kings and civilizations.
Okay, again, power and civilization. Yes, sir?
Showing how advanced they are when it comes to architecture all the time, because of the different way they
Indeed, they were very sophisticated, because even today, a lot of, let's say, architects try to analyze and understand how they succeeded to build such huge pyramids using heavy and huge stones. You know, when you go there and you see how massive and heavy the stones, you just wonder how they succeeded to bring them up there to the summit. Indeed, it's a very impressive building.
I think so basically they were like stronger and taller and from the human beings living in this century.
You mean physically they were
Yes.
strong? I don't think so. No, it's not a matter of the body. It's not. Many of the people who built these were slaves. Okay, were slaves, not really the Egyptian slaves, but Egyptian slaves.
Look how intelligent we are to build intelligent design.
Yes, sophisticated design. Now, all these ideas could indeed explain what the pyramids signify. They could signify indeed the power of such a, a dynasty, because it's a dynasty, and a dynasty that lasted for hundreds of years. So it's indeed a sign of their power. It could also be the sign of their intelligence. They succeeded to design something unique. Probably there is something in Latin America, I will talk about it in a while, in Peru. But at that time there were no, communication. There was no communication between the countries. And so no one could copy from the other. The Egyptians created something that looks like this pyramid, and in Peru they did the same. Yes, sir.
I think you're wrong because they're not actually slaves who make pyramids. There are lots of evidence groups.
In most of the documentaries I watched, the specialists were talking about slaves because the conditions of such a labor were extremely, extremely harsh. And you cannot accept such conditions unless you are a person without any freedom. So, regardless of who built them, but we are trying just to understand that architecture from the very early times, because the Egyptian civilization is indeed one of the very old ones, was associated with some values. And so these values could be power, okay? Power, the power of the pharaohs. It could also be the expression of intelligence. We are intelligent people, and indeed we succeeded to create something very sophisticated. But I think it could also signify something else, related to life and death. The human being, in general, from the very beginning of life, has always been challenged by his mortal body and mortal existence and ephemeral existence. We are all born to die one day, and therefore our existence is not permanent, but it's rather ephemeral. Even if you are a king, or even if you are a big hero, Time is our worst enemy, because time is always moving ahead and ahead, and of course it perishes every body, including the human body. And so when you have this in mind, this idea of being a mortal creature, you try also to create something that we can call eternal. And what is this eternal? Before, the emergence of religions that we call today the monotheistic religions like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, where the idea of heaven and hell were created. Before this, because we are speaking about, ancient time, the old civilizations believed that the only way for them to face time and to preserve their permanent existence was through architecture. So when you build a pyramid, and when this pyramid is a kind of symmetry, because it's a symmetry, where kings and queens and heroes are buried, it's as if you protect yourself from death and from this transient and ephemeral life that our body actually suffers from. So the pyramid, therefore, is always a way of keeping your name and keeping your soul, or keeping your greatness alive for maybe the coming generations and the coming civilizations. Of course, for the Egyptians, they strongly believed that there was an afterlife. They strongly believed in that. And they believed that if they one day return back to life, it's better for them to have all their gold and all their children and their wives around them, rather than to find yourself somewhere with no money, no family, etc. So they believed strongly in this, and that's why they built such pyramids. But the other, I think, meaningful explanation that is common to all civilizations is how architecture is a sign of eternal survival. It's really a sign of how the human body and the human being can face time and face death. So this is something that we find in old Egypt. But if we go to another civilization in Peru, we realize that they created the same thing. They also created some pyramids, and they also buried their relatives there, and they had, of course, their own belief why they would bury people in such pyramids. But in all cases, either in ancient times or even in modern times, architecture, particularly when it is a massive architecture, is always associated with power, with greatness, but more precisely, with this desire to live for eternity. Even if we die, but this architecture will preserve our memory. So this is therefore an idea that could apply to all these old buildings we find in all civilizations. If we move to a more recent period of time, and a more recent, let's say, country called France, we realized that architecture was also associated with similar, let's say, values. This is what is called the Arc of Victory or Triumph, in French, l'Arc de Triomphe. And it's in in Paris. This is the heart of Paris. Okay, I will show you another example of this. So this is another view of the same arch. Okay, it's right in the middle of the city, and this is Paris. And of course, when you see this city again from this third eye view, you realize that the heart of the city, or the center of the city, is this arch. It's there. So what does it signify? Why have, it's Napoleon, actually it's Napoleon, the French emperor, who decided to build this arch right in the middle of Paris as a symbol of his military victories. And indeed, Napoleon was a very successful military leader, and when he, let's say, won so many victories, he decided to build an arch in the heart of Paris, and actually this will be the beginning of a whole city. So what again could such a building signify? We've talked about the pyramids, but we are here in a very modern era. It's the 18th, the beginning of the 19th century. So what could it again signify?
So that his exploits will be immortalized by building the Arc of Triumph. No one will forget the things he did.
Indeed. Yes.
It's the proud of French people.
The French should be proud of him. Yes. So here again, it's not accidental that he decided during his life to build something massive and impressive, and to call it the Ark of Victory or Triumph. It's indeed a symbol of how France is a great nation, particularly in Europe, because at that time France was in constant wars against, Germans, against the Dutch, against the Spanish, etc. So all this sense of greatness and power were symbolized by one building at the heart of the city. And when you go today to Paris, you will see that indeed the very famous, this is the very famous Champs-Élysées. Of course, the Champs-Élysées, so this is the very famous avenue where the most luxurious businesses and shops are. And this avenue is actually heading towards the Arc of Triumph. So again, the whole city, but I would say the whole nation, because Paris is the capital of France, and it's also the capital of a nation that we call today the French nation. So this is therefore almost the symbol of a nation. But it's not associated with, let's say, as we said, ephemeral life and death, but it's here associated with military power, with victory. And so we can therefore see how, in the modern society, a new value has been applied to architecture. Of course, when you go there and you are just an ordinary person, you cannot make connections between history and architecture. But when you are an analyst, you understand that this building is more than a building. It's the symbol of a nation. Indeed, France, from the 19th century onwards, will colonize many African and Arab countries. And this French colonialism was also the expression of its power, its victory. So, long time before colonialism, Napoleon was almost trying to pave the way for the coming French republics. That is, he was almost telling them that your destiny is to be among the great nations. And that's why today France is still proud of its history and is always trying to keep this history alive, even in a soft manner. Okay? So this is therefore as far as another symbol of architecture is concerned. Now, if we go back to Morocco, we can also learn that architecture has also been associated with history, with dynasties, but also with some religious values. Before we talk about religious values, I selected for you just an example of a minaret. This is quite famous in Morocco, called Al-Koutoubia minaret. You may find a similar minaret in Rabat, and it's indeed Hassan minaret. The two were built by the Almohad dynasty. And so what does a minaret, and why have the Almohads decided to build some big but similar minarets, one in Marrakesh, one in Rabat, and one in Sevilla, that we call La Giralda. You know that there is a very famous minaret in Sevilla, built by the Almohad, and it was a mosque. But later on, after the Reconquista, the Spanish converted it into a cathedral. But it is just identical to the Al-Koutoubia or to Hassan minaret. They are exactly identical. And by the way, if you take the map of Morocco and that of Spain, this is what you will realize. Come in. So this is the map of Morocco. You have here Rabat. And then you have here Marrakesh. And right here, there is Spain. Spain, here there is Sevilla. So, according to some studies, well, first, before the study, the three minarets built by the Almohad during the same period, one in Marrakesh called Koutoubia, one in Rabat called Hassan, and one in Sevilla called La Giralda in Spanish. They are all identical in matters of design, in matters of architecture, in matters of height, etc. They are identical. When you go to Marrakesh and Rabat and Sevilla, you just wonder how those who built it were capable of almost producing the same minarets. I believe it's because those who designed it had a plan. And this plan was designed somewhere in Morocco before taking it to Spain. The other possible reason why they were identical is just to unify two, let's say, countries. But of course to unify them not geographically only, but to unify them religiously. Spain is now a Muslim country, just like Morocco, which is a Muslim country. So this is the other significance of how a minaret, that is architecture, could also symbolize something in the Moroccan history. What is also extremely intriguing is that the distance between Marrakesh and Rabat is almost similar to the distance between Sevilla and Rabat. When you calculate the distance between these three cities, you realize that it's almost identical. So it's as if the Almohad wanted really to say that we are creating not only similar minarets, but we are almost creating an equal distance between two big capitals in the Almohad kingdom. A capital here in Spain called Sevilla, another big city in Rabat, and of course the capital of the Almohad in Marrakesh. Probably, if they were still in power in Spain, we could have created other minarets and other mosques somewhere else in Spain or maybe in France. But of course, history did not go that way. So this is therefore how in Morocco, again, we can understand that architecture, and here the example of the minaret, symbolizes some values. These are, of course, the values of victory, military victory of the Almohad, but it's also the Islamic value of what we call al-Fath. We are not only conquering a country, but we are also spreading a religion to non-Muslim communities, that is, those living in Spain. Today, in very modern Morocco, we can find another symbol, again, of architecture associated with religion. And it's Hassan II Mosque in Casablanca. And again, when Hassan II decided to build such a big mosque in Casablanca, he was not only concerned with a new place for worship, but he was also thinking of other, maybe ideas. And I would like you, if possible, to read his mind. What was he thinking of when selecting Casablanca as a place for the biggest mosque in Morocco, and selecting, let's say, the shore or the sea, it's almost a sea, where to build the mosque? So what were then his intention?
Morocco didn't lose his strength of the country. Like he's remembering the people that he still so like the Mohammed and Muhammad.
Maybe. Yes.
Perhaps because Casa is a big port city, that Egypt should see the mosque from afar, foreign nations.
Indeed, it's a kind of lighthouse. I agree with you. This mosque, this minaret is almost like a lighthouse, guiding not only ships, but also guiding hearts of Muslims. It's possible. What else? What could such a mosque or a minaret mean? And why has Hassan II decided to build a huge mosque rather than a skyscraper? Why? Why a mosque rather than something similar to his son, Mohammed VI, or like what the Qatar government is doing today, building very modern buildings? Again, you see that architecture is always associated with some ideas that could be very difficult to discern or to understand at first heart. But of course, if you maybe study science and study the context, you may probably reach some possible answers.
I believe since in the period of the King Hassan too, he had problems with the French. He always talked with them about religion and about our culture and the problems that Moroccans deal with in France concerning our religion. So I believe by choosing Casablanca, which is we can say it's a really modern city in terms of our geographical premises. Building a mosque that is this big says that no matter how modern we are or how developed we become, we still have the basis of our religion.
I agree with that, the last part of your argument, not the first, because I don't think that he had any problems with the French.
But there were a lot of shows where he talked and argued with French journalists.
Well, you know, he loved being interviewed by journalists, simply because he was so intelligent and he spoke French better than French people, but that was not a sign of any conflict. Well, yes?
I think it chose to build the mosque in Casablanca because first Casablanca is named the Spanish Casablanca and is the economical capital. And many tourists visited Casablanca, so he was addressed to tourists more than local inhabitants.
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. It's not really, though today it's a very touristy place. But in the time when it was built, it was not really intended to be so. So, again, as I said, any architectural building is never an accidental one, but it's always the expression of something extremely subtle and extremely difficult to understand. But again, if you, as I said, try to analyze what is between the lines, you may read some of the answers. I am not pretending to tell you all the answers because I cannot read his mind, but I will just suggest some possible answers. Well, first of all, by building the biggest, at that time it was the biggest mosque in the Islamic world, but also the biggest mosque in Morocco and in Casablanca. Hassan II was also trying to say that I am a great king. I am a great king. Just like the old Egyptians who built the minarets. And they were trying to say that we are a great nation or dynasty. So he was also trying to say that I am a great king. And I am also the commander of the faithful. You know what is the commander of the faithful? Amir al-Mu'minin. When you are the commander of the faithful, one of your first jobs is to spread Islam, to protect Islam. How can you spread Islam? Is by building mosques. But not only ordinary mosques, huge and massive mosques. Where? By the seaside. By the seaside. And indeed, there is a verse in the Quran saying that the God's armchair is on the sea. So he copied this image from the Quran to say that we are almost trying to symbolically create another divine armchair here in Casablanca, because it's actually on the seaside. And when you go there, you see that the waves keep, splashing all around the day on the different walls and sides of the mosque. The second possible answer is that this is a big colonial and economic city. Casablanca is a colonial city first. It was a colonial, that is, it was created by the French. Unlike Marrakesh or Fez or Rabat or Meknes, which were built by the Moroccans and the Muslims, Casablanca was created by the French. Now I'll show you some examples. Oh, sorry, the battery again. This is an example of Casablanca at the very beginning of the 20th century. And indeed, when you see this image of Casablanca, you realize that it has nothing to do with the Moroccan architecture. It's a French city, designed according to French standards, and designed by French architects. Just like when you go to Himriya in Meknes, you realize that all the new city is designed according to a French perception of urbanism. And indeed here, it's not a Moroccan city, it's a French colonial city. Of course, when the French created such a city, Casablanca, but also created all the new cities in Morocco, they had one idea in mind, which was, of course, to bring the European and French civilization to Morocco. And by doing so, they were also trying to assimilate the local population. To assimilate means that the people should abandon their culture, their language, their religion, their tradition, but also their architectural heritage. What is the architectural heritage of Moroccans?
Mosques.
One, mosques.
Riyadhs.
Where are the riyadhs? Where are they?
Big cities.
Big gates. But where can you find gates in the riyadh? In the old city, that's in the Medina. Does the Medina in Morocco look like this? No. A totally different architecture. But it is an authentic architecture. And it has a lot of meanings when you study again how the Medina is structured. You learn that it's the expression of a community, the expression of a culture, the expression of a religion. The Medina looks like almost a unified body, an organic body. And what does that mean? A unified and organic body from a religious and Islamic perspective. Can you give me the name of this unified and organic body? Yes, collectively, but there is in Arabic a more meaningful word. What do we call this when it's a unified and organic body? There is another word. Tawheed, yes, but there is another term. Tahadul, yes. Ummah. That's the word. So it's not only architecture. You know, when all these buildings, have you seen how the Medinas are built? The Medinas are built in a almost organic manner. All the walls and all the houses and all the streets are connected. While here, you can see a lot of space. So what does it mean that you have here a lot of empty space? Apart from functional purposes.
To make the people separate you from
Individualism. So here, it's the individual that actually matters. You drive a car. So you are alone driving your car right in the middle of the city. So it's the individual that matters first. So again, as you can see, when Hassan II wanted to build this mosque in Casablanca, he was also trying to almost decolonize the city of Casablanca from its French colonial impact and heritage, and to bring it back to the Islamic tradition. Because in the Islamic tradition, a city without a mosque is not a city. There should be a mosque, or maybe more than a mosque, in a city before Muslims decide to live there. Today, even if you go to villages in Morocco, the first thing that the community would build is a mosque. While the French were not concerned at all with religion. They had their own churches in Casablanca. But they neglected the Islamic tradition. And that's why Hassan II wanted to bring Casablanca back to its Islamic origin by building a mosque called Casablanca or Hassan II Mosque. Now, if we again try to analyze the architecture and the design of this mosque, we will learn a lot. One of the first things we can learn about this mosque is that even if it's built in the 80s, in 1980s, it has no modern features. It's extremely conventional, extremely traditional. So you see that its shape looks like all the mosques in Morocco. The design looks like all the mosques in Morocco. The color, the green color, again, is something you can find almost everywhere. Even the tiles or the gelige, you can see sometimes there, is something that you can find almost everywhere. In other words, even if it's a very, even if it's built in a very modern period, that is in 1980s, late 80s, in a modern city called Casablanca, the mosque has nothing to do with modernity. It's very traditional. And by the way, all the mosques and all the minarets in Morocco are 100% traditional in matters of architecture and design. And if they are traditional in matters of architecture and design, it's again the expression of a policy. It's an expression of a policy adopted by the Ministry of Endowment or the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, according to which any deviation from the Andalusian tradition is unacceptable in Morocco. Because the Ministry of Islamic Affairs believes that the most sophisticated architecture is or has a link with the Andalus or Andalusia. And therefore, we should always preserve this Andalusian heritage. So that's why whenever you go to mosques or to mausoleums or even palaces, royal palaces, you will find that the model adopted everywhere is the Andalusian model. And this is an Andalusian minaret. Just like the other minarets you may find in northern Morocco, particularly in Tetuan.
So there is another aspect that I want to talk about, which is the means or resources used to build this mosque. And I believe it goes well with the statement you gave, the interpretation you gave us about Al-Ummah and how the Medina is unified. I'm not sure about it, but it is said that the resources used were taken from the taxes of the people. So there's a side that says it's for unification and everybody contributed to building that mosque, and the other side says it's oppression, but that's not all.
Again, it depends on which side you side.
Yeah.
I remember I was a student when it was being built, and I was obliged also to pay a dirham. Everyone at least had to pay a dirham, if not more. So a symbolic dirham should be paid by everyone, but if you have more money, you should pay more. And sometimes indeed people were forced to pay more. So let's forget this issue. We are here just to speak about the edifice itself. Because if we go back to the pyramids, and we will also learn that the slaves who built it were tortured. Today, the city of Doha is also was built by Indians, by Pakistanis, and by many other, let's say, people coming from third world countries, and this is the reason why Europeans are always criticizing it. But what matters at the end of the day is the result, not the procedure.
If we go beyond the issue of how it was taken from the people, it's quite unifying that everybody can
Yes, I agree with you. I said it depends on which side you side. So if you side with those who believe that this is a symbol of belonging to the Ummah, that's good. That's good. But this is not the question we are debating today. So, again, as you see, architecture in modern Morocco, because we are speaking here about the end of the 80s, is not that modern. It's extremely traditional. And normally, we should expect a minaret or a mosque where we can find a lot of modern, let's say, shapes, modern materials, modern designs, etc. No, nothing of this happened. And what actually was adopted is the pure traditional Andalusian tradition. If you move to some other, oh sorry, no, this Now, if you take an example of a modern mosque, and this is an example I selected just to compare between two different mosques, one in Morocco, Casablanca, Hassan II Mosque, and another mosque somewhere in Stuttgart in Germany. You realize that the two have nothing in common, though the two are places for worship. So here, some Muslim people in Germany, in Stuttgart, go to accomplish their 5 prayers every day. But the design of the mosque and the minaret in particular is extremely different and modern. So I would like to hear your feedback when you see such an example of a mosque in Germany. So what do you feel when you see this? Yes?
It's an updated mosque.
Yes, modern. I told you it's modern. Yes.
It doesn't look like a mosque, it looks like a house.
Really? Really? A house? But the mosque is also Baytullah. We call it Baytullah.
Yeah, but it doesn't have like the shape of it.
What is the shape of a mosque?
I don't know, it just seems like
It's simply because you are not yet familiar with the other types of Islamic architecture, modern Islamic architecture, because you still see things from a Moroccan perspective. Yes?
I think Muslims in Germany try to veer from the view that Islam is very has all points of view. It tries to keep up with the modern architecture.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that. So, again, your thoughts about this modern mosque, because we are speaking about architecture, and this is a very modern mosque. That is a modern Islamic architecture. So, what does it mean again? We have seen the previous example of Hassan II's minaret and mosque, and we said that it's extremely traditional because it adopts only one style called the Andalusian style. Here, we have a mosque where people pray, but everything is extremely modern.
Maybe they want to prove to journalists that Muslims of nowadays they are open-minded and they can change the design of the mosque and they can like build it like a house. But what matters is that house is the house of God. So you can go there and you can worship God no matter how it's designed.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Yes, please.
I agree with what she said. I like the idea because usually Islam is viewed as primitive. The mosque, the place where we worship are viewed as primitive and left on the throne, while this breaks the stereotypes.
Okay, I agree with that too. Yes, sir.
I believe that it is an attempt to blend in, because they know they're not in a Muslim country. That's why they are building a mosque in such a way to say that we are here, but on your terms. It's alright to build a mosque that is different from the mosques in Muslim countries. We will build it according to the norms here, but it's still a mosque.
That's also possible. Anyway, the question that matters now is that even in matters of building a mosque or a religious place, architecture could indeed change and adopt so many different styles. So we have seen the Moroccan style, but if I showed you the American style, you would probably be extremely surprised how in Michigan, mosques are totally different from what you are familiar with. I just selected for you an example from Germany, but what actually this mosque tries to say, and in addition to what you have said, is that for German Muslims who are living in Stuttgart, they are trying to design something in line with modern Germany, that's one, but they are also trying to create something different from all these, what we call Islamic countries like, Saudi Arabia, or like maybe Morocco, or like Turkey, etc., where there is the monopoly of religion. There is only one religion called Islam. So here in Germany, there are so many religious communities. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, etc., etc. And therefore, it's as if the German Muslims want to say that we are different from all the other traditions that you are familiar with, and which are associated, as you said, with sometimes violence, fanaticism, gender inequality, etc., etc. So here they are simply trying to say this is a place where modern Islam could also be practiced. And what is modern Islam? Modern Islam is more than houses, more than walls. It's more than a minaret that is extremely different from what we are familiar with. Modern Islam is also the one that is tolerant, that is open, that is respecting diversity. And when you are a Muslim living in Germany, you have to be a modern Muslim. You have to, because your neighbor and your employer and your government, etc., are people who are different from you. They are not Muslims, and therefore you have to respect their religion as much as you have to respect your religion. So this is therefore how we can also explain that The other possible explanation is that architecture in matters of religion is extremely controlled by the state. So when you are in Morocco and you want to build a mosque in Morocco, you're not free to design how the mosque or how the minaret will look like. No, there is a book published by the Ministry of Islamic Affairs where all the details and all the requirements are mentioned. And you have to stick to them. You cannot just be creative and say that I'm going to create something like this. If you submit a plan like this for a mosque in Morocco, it will be denied. Simply because in Morocco there is a model. And this model, as I said, is the Andalusian model. This is a very modern model. And therefore, it is possible only in some countries in the West, but not at all possible in some countries like Morocco, or like Saudi Arabia, or like Iran, etc. So indeed, when you go to these countries, in Morocco, all mosques and all minarets are identical. In Saudi Arabia, they are all identical. In Turkey, they are all identical. Simply because there is one common policy adopted by the state. Here, this architecture expresses the freedom of Muslims living in Germany. They are free to design things according to their own choice. So if they hired an architect, maybe a Muslim architect or a non-Muslim architect, they would simply tell him or her that we would like to build a mosque here in Stuttgart, but we would like it to be something quite different from what is common in the Islamic world, but also something modern. The result is this. And it's possible because the local German, let's say, government or authority would not say no, because they believe in democracy.
So also people, government people refuse to accept this model, especially in mosques. That's why German, for example, is more living in freedom. That's why we can see that this mosque shows the freedom of Jews.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And that's why I'm here trying to tell you that architecture is more than stones and buildings, but it's the expression of policies, of values, of religious beliefs, etc., etc. And you should simply analyze these in order to understand a lot about society or the country where it is practiced. Now, in very modern, let's say, we talked about an example from Moroccan culture and society, and the example was that of the mosques and minarets. But in more modern times and in more modern societies, architecture is no longer associated with religion. Religion is today something gradually abandoned. And it's no longer the symbol of power or the symbol of a faith. Today, in different modern countries, you realize that architecture is actually trying to transmit new values. And so when you look at this example of New York, what do you feel when you see such impressive buildings? Yes?
Greatness of USA.
Greatness of USA. What else? Yes? Wealth.
Developed economy.
Developed economy. Power again. So this is indeed what the architecture of New York symbolizes. It symbolizes power. It symbolizes progress, development, a sophisticated society, etc., etc. And indeed, the height of such building expresses also the power of the people who designed them. We're not here dealing with, medium-sized walls or towers, but they are actually skyscrapers. They are huge and impressive. And so in these, the big companies have their offices. And actually when 9/11 happened, the terrorists who attacked the two towers in New York, they really wanted to attack the symbol of American supremacy. So they attacked architecture as a symbol of supremacy. They did not only put a bomb somewhere on the streets, but they really attacked the symbol of supremacy. And this supremacy is first visual, architectural, but it's also massive. Well, when the buildings were crumbling, the terrorists were extremely excited because they said that we succeeded to demolish the power of America. But apart from this, again, modern cities today try to show their power not through religion, but through economy. That is money. This is China. An example of a Chinese city, but there are so many similar Chinese cities that look like this. And indeed, when you see this, you realize that it's almost identical to New York. It's identical to New York. The same massive buildings, skyscrapers, etc. But it's also the same, let's say, the same idea, power. And today, China is indeed a real power in the military field, in the scientific field, in the economic field, etc., etc. And so all this is expressed in matters of architecture. Where is this? It's Doha. And as I said earlier, Qatar today is almost adopted the same model that the Americans and then the Chinese have already adopted. And they succeeded in a very short time to compete with them, with these two powers. Indeed, Doha today is something that looks like that. So the Qatari government and people are also trying to send messages to the rest of the world. We are as powerful as you, and maybe we are more powerful than you. So what is the meaning of organizing the World Cup? And what is the meaning of building such extremely sophisticated stadiums? Stadiums with air conditioning. It never happened before at all. So what is the meaning of that?
I think they are trying to convey the message that they are not financially speaking. Just on what comes to financial matters. I think they're rich. They're not developed in terms of knowledge and...
Well, this is another issue. The Chinese are communist. And communism is one of the most primitive ideologies. So don't accuse them. So, what is actually the meaning of this architecture that today Qatar has succeeded to build? A city that looks like this, but also stadiums that are so sophisticated. What is the message?
Because always the Western world, they were insulted the Arabs in general. So they think that the Arab they cannot reach their level. But Qatar in this 20 years they proved that no, they can reach that level or maybe more than this level.
I agree with that.
They're trying to change the Eurocentric view by making the visitors marvel in front of their architecture.
I agree with that. So this is actually the new message that architecture in Qatar is trying to send to the world. And by organizing the World Cup, it was a unique opportunity for them just to be visible. Visible almost everywhere in the world. Everyone today is visiting Qatar, let's say, on a digital level. You can visit the streets of Doha, you can see documentaries, you can see films, etc. But whenever you see Doha or Qatar, this is what you discover. A very developed, a very sophisticated country. But this development is first a material, that is an architectural development. We do not have here an idea about their universities, or their hospitals, or their families, or their culture, or their art. No, what actually is visible here is architecture. It's stadiums, it's, highways, but it's also cities like this. The same also we can find this in Dubai. So here indeed, people in the Gulf countries, particularly Qatar and Dubai, they are trying indeed to tell the world that they are as developed as the rest of the world, if not more developed. And by this they are challenging, as you said, the Eurocentric view, or this Western view of only the West can be developed, while all the other countries are, let's say, subordinates or followers. This is the reason also why most of the world has been surprised by the success of the Moroccan team. They were simply saying, how come that a poor country like Morocco could cope with Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and maybe tomorrow France? It's the same idea that there is a center, and the center is the West. And there is a periphery, and the periphery is the non-West. Qatar today is telling the world that the center today is Doha. This is actually the other meaning of architecture in the Gulf countries. When we come to Morocco, and by the way, this is Morocco. Do you know where it is? Oh, you see, Casa, sorry, I shouldn't have written this. Casa Finance City. Today in Morocco, there is a district or a neighborhood in Casablanca, in Anfa, and it looks like this. Indeed, when you go there, or when you just try to see videos of it, you realize that it looks like this. It's very sophisticated, and here I speak about architecture, very impressive. The shapes are very creative. See, for example, the shape of this building is something unique, or the shape of this building again, it looks like almost a human being with eyes and mouth, etc. And the site is not yet over. So they are still building almost daily. And maybe in a few years, when this project is over, it will look like something in Qatar or in New York, etc. So what does, again, this signify? We are here in Morocco. What does this architecture signify? Yes? No idea. That's what does it signify?
So maybe we are a third world country, but we are developing ourselves step by step. We can reach, as I said before, the level of the Western countries. Maybe in the next years we will reach a good level. And
That's possible.
picture is where we're also developed.
I can't hear you.
It shows that we're also a developed country.
Developing.
Basically, they are trying to copy the developed country to be recognized by the voice of other countries.
I agree with that. So this is the idea. The idea first is that how today architecture is the mirror of a country or an economy that are both developing. We have here some buildings or a whole district where it is architecture first that tries to transmit this message of development. And when you see, or if you were not familiar with this neighborhood, and if I did not write Casa Finance City, probably most of you would tell me, well, this is maybe in New York, or this is, no, it is indeed Casablanca. But it has nothing to do with the old Casablanca you are maybe familiar with, where there is a lot of chaos, a lot of traffic jam, etc. Everything here is organized in a very sophisticated manner. And so it seems that today Morocco has adopted a model that we have already seen in New York, we have already seen in China, and today in the Gulf countries. And indeed, it is adopting this model as a sign of development. So these societies, which could be international companies or national companies, are building their own offices there to say that we are indeed the most developed, let's say, finance market in Africa. Because indeed, this place is a finance city. All the buildings there are banks or companies dealing in finance, whatever. So architecture, once again, is the best mirror of how society is developing or changing.
So it's like a competition between countries to look more beautiful and great and strong.
It is the same competition we had in the past. You know, when you go to Europe, you will find that there was a competition about who would build the biggest cathedral. Today, there is a competition who would build the highest building. So it's the same, but it's always architecture. It's architecture that expresses this kind of competition. That's another image of Casa Finance City. And indeed, when you see the city, you just realize that it's no longer the old Medina of Marrakesh or Meknes, but it's simply a very modern society. Here is another symbol of modernity. And it's, of course, the Mohammed VI Tower in Rabat. Once again, it's a kind of finance tower, because many banks will be, and companies will be, let's say, launched there. And at the end of the project, it will look like this. It will look like this. So again, what does such a tower mean? If you compare it, for example, with Hassan II Mosque, why has Mohammed VI, let's say, given his name and also chosen this project to symbolize his persona?
I think this one is more modern than the first one.
Which first one? Of course it's more modern, but the first one was a mosque, and this is a finance tower.
I guess this represents the idea that we are abandoning the traditional style and adopting a new style, which is modernity.
Maybe. Yes?
I think that this tower is like standing alone, individual independence. can see that this tower is like sending a law that symbolize power, symbolize beauty. Also.
Yes, power, beauty. What else?
I think by building this tower, the king is trying to show his, as you said, his persona on how he thinks and his vision for Morocco as a country that is developing. And if we look at the things that Mohammed VI did after taking the throne, like the one in Bosra and other issues that he solved inside our society that are purely traditional, he's trying to modernize Morocco even in matters of
I
architecture.
totally agree with that. That's to the point indeed.
I think also this tower is trying to change the bad side to the west.
Maybe, yes.
I think that they are trying to reach the sky as a sign of power.
Of course, it's power. Now, again, when you look at this tower and when you put it in its environment, this is what you realize. You realize that this tower is put in a almost side by side by what is it called? Hassan Tower. Yes, Hassan Tower. Hassan Tower is on one side, and Mohammed VI Tower is on the other. That's one. And again, when you look at the mausoleum, you have the mausoleum here, and you have the new big theater on the other side. So it's as if, and this is something you have to do when you go to Rabat, and you will see that the position of these edifices is not accidental. So we have here Hassan Tower, but on the other side of the river, you have the Mohammed VI
Also the same.
Tower. That's one. You have here the mausoleum. On the other side, you have the theater. In other words, tradition is on one side, modernity is on the other. And in between, there is a river. So it's as if, I don't know, the monarchy or the state are trying to tell us that Morocco actually is moving ahead, moving away from tradition, moving away from, some old norms that were probably sacred in the past. A mausoleum is indeed sacred. A mosque like Hassan Tower is also sacred. Now we are moving towards modernity. How? By building a very high tower. It's the highest in Africa, 250 meters high. And also by building the biggest theater in Africa. So all these are expressions of how the society is following a new path, the path of modernity. So this is in matters of finance. But we can find the same language or the same message almost everywhere. If you take train stations today in Morocco, this is Abdel. And when you go there, inside you just feel impressed by the modernity of this train station. Just like the one in Qanitra. When you go to Qanitra today, you really feel that this is just an impressive train station. And by the way, this design won the best architecture prize in New York 4 years ago, which is indeed a recognition of its merit. But apart from this, we have here different symbols of Morocco. We have seen a site of finance and money, that is Anfa Finance City. We have seen a tower in Rabat. But we have also other examples like this train station in Tenerife or another train station in Abidjan as I showed earlier. That's another example of modernity. Another example of modernity is the airport in Marrakesh. And indeed, when you go to this airport, you realize that this is extremely modern. The most recent example of modern architecture is the Coke Station in Rotterdam. And indeed, it looks totally different from the common, model that we were familiar with. This is the kind of coach station we used to have in Morocco. And so what does such an image of a coach station reveal when you compare it to the previous one? Chaos. So this is actually the meaning of such a transition. It's a transition from chaos, from anarchy, from very old practices to something extremely modern. So it's modern in matters of design, but it's also modern in matters of working. Today, you can book your seat online. You don't need to go to the Coke station and buy your ticket. You just book your seat online, and that's it. So all in all, and to summarize what I have been trying to say, architecture is a very meaningful language, probably as meaningful as literature or philosophy or art in general. You may read a philosophy book and you learn a lot from it, but when you read the language of architecture, you can also learn a lot from it. Architecture in all civilizations, all societies throughout history has always been associated with some values, with some symbols. It could be the symbol of power, symbol of eternity, etc. In Morocco, architecture is also today adopted officially by the Moroccan state, but also by the Moroccan private sector to transmit a message about a country that is trying to move ahead and to modernize. So these are the basic thoughts that I wanted to do today to grasp. Do you have any questions? Do you have any questions? So, you know that the exam is soon. I was not expecting that, to tell you the truth. I was expecting an extra week, and all of a sudden I received an email telling me that classes should stop this week. I'm sorry that this happened. But what matters is what you learn. It's not how many weeks you have stayed here. So do you have any questions about the exam that you want me to answer?
Sure, speak about before, the plain questions or...
No plain questions. No plain questions. Never. There will be one argument. One argument. Maybe with a picture. Maybe with a picture. I really have no idea, because you are studying media and visual studies. So there will be one argument and maybe a picture, and it will be asked to respond. To respond, that is to write an essay about this question. So how can you succeed? How can you succeed? First of all, you have to go and read all your notes, all your, your notes or your recordings or whatever you have been using. I really have no idea how you organize your lectures. And And so you have to read these, because we studied a lot. If I gave you some articles, read them. If I gave you a book, read it. If I sent you some slides, again, see them. That's one. Second, if you have some doubt about something, for example, today we studied architecture, I may ask you a question about architecture, but I have not given you any article. Most of the material was lecturing. So I was just talking to you, and of course, what I told you could be considered a material for the exam. So if you believe that probably today you did not take enough notes, or you did not grasp something, go and read about architecture. Read about the significance of architecture, and you will find a lot of books, a lot of architecture, a lot of articles explaining what is architecture, how it is expressed in this and that. That is, do some research. And I believe what you could do about architecture could also be done about propaganda, for example, or about, advertisements that we study, or about, the Arab summit, etc., etc. That is, everything which we studied so far has to be reconsidered and maybe amplified. That is, read more and more. The more you read, the better you will achieve.
We have some questions and we have
One question. No, you know why? I tell you why I always opt for one question. I want it to be equal for everyone. Because if you have one question, everyone will produce the same response. But if you have two questions, maybe some will be favored than others. So I prefer one, and this is just more, let's say, fair. Thank you very much.